I am broke. Nobody who watched Paul Teutul Senior build a motorcycle empire every week ever expected to hear those words from him. This was the man who dominated primetime television for years, who turned raw metal into a multi-million-dollar dynasty. And then one morning he walked into a courthouse and filed bankruptcy papers. 4 dogs, a few old pistols worth $200, one desktop computer valued at $25. That was everything he had left. His mansion was already even heading to foreclosure.
It's the last one on the way out. But you know, there's kind of like mixed feelings a little bit. Like, we've been here for 15 years. We built the building.
And the most shocking part? His son, Paul Jr., filed his own bankruptcy that same year. How did a father and son who earned millions every single season end up losing everything at the exact same time? This is the true story of what was really happening behind the cameras of American Chopper.
The ones the cameras loved most. 2 men built this entire empire with their bare hands, and the 2 men watched it collapse on them in the exact same month of the exact same year. That is not a coincidence. That is a warning sign that something rotten had been sitting underneath this business for years, and it finally caught up to both of them at once.
If I wasn't involved, this place would go to bullshit. It would burn to the ground. That's bull. You know what? Get the out of here.
Paul Teutul Senior walked into a bankruptcy court in February of 2018 carrying paperwork that exposed everything the show had hidden from its audience. He listed $1,801,000 in assets against over $1 million in crushing debt. Sounds survivable, right? Then you look closer at his monthly numbers and the whole thing falls apart. Paul Senior was pulling in around $15,700 a month, and after his bills, he had almost nothing left to throw at a debt pile that size. His own mansion, the same one fans watched him raise from the ground on their television screens, was already sliding toward foreclosure. The town wanted over $50,000 in unpaid taxes. A supplier was chasing him for nearly $40,000. Credit card companies had already dragged him into 8 separate lawsuits worth $66,000 combined. The walls were closing in from every single direction. And then came the moment that really exposed him. When the court demanded a full list of his personal belongings, this man who once built 6-figure custom motorcycles handed over a list that looked like the contents of a dead man's garage sale. 3 worn-out cars, furniture worth $500. 3 dogs, a few rusted pistols, and 1 desktop computer valued at $25. There was no jewelry, no art, not even a single motorcycle to his name, despite building them for a living. The mansion Paul tried selling for $2,490,000 eventually got dragged through bankruptcy court and sold for a humiliating $1,500,000. And even then, they had to throw in a bulldozer and a tractor just to close the deal. Paul Senior spent 15 years building that house, and in the end it was sold off like scrap just to keep the wolves at bay. As if that humiliation wasn't enough, 2 years later a federal court ordered Paul Senior and his son Mikey to pay a photographer over $258,000. Why? Because they had ripped his copyrighted photo of Mikey straight off the internet, dragged his signature off the image, and slapped it onto shirts and hoodies to sell for profit. Just think about that for a second. A family that built its entire empire on selling its own image got caught red-handed, stealing someone else's. But money troubles were the least of Paul Senior's problems, because his own business partner was about to accuse him of something far darker than simply being broke. In 2017, a man named Thomas Derbyshire stood up in court and called Paul Senior a fraudster, straight to his face. Derbyshire had poured $3 million into a brand-new television project featuring Rusty Coons from Sons of Anarchy, expecting a real show in return for his money. Instead, according to the lawsuit, Paul Senior vanished for an entire week to go fishing while cameras sat idle and money burned. He allegedly refused to work with contractors who had already been paid in full. He secretly funneled production money to pay his own son's salary, without ever telling his partner where the money was going. Paul Senior even traded free dog food to his girlfriend's animal rescue and grabbed free gear for his shop, all completely off the books. Just picture Derbyshire finding out about all of this. Picture the moment he realized his $3 million had gone to fishing trips and secret payroll checks instead of the show he was promised. Wouldn't you feel robbed too? Paul Senior's legal team denied every single accusation, But the lawsuit never quietly disappeared. It sat there, exposed, painting a picture of a man who treated someone else's fortune like his own personal wallet. The chaos kept coming. A company called JTM Motorsports was holding Paul Senior's Corvette hostage over an unpaid bill of $17,000, and by 2019, a federal judge had actually found him in contempt of court for refusing to pay it. Then came the moment that turned this whole saga into a spectacle. During a court-mandated mediation session in July of 2018, Paul Senior snapped completely. Witnesses say he shot up from his chair, screamed across the table, and lunged straight at the opposing lawyer. 3 court officers had to physically drag him out of the building. Just picture him roaring, "Give me my car back!" as security grabbed his arms and hauled him toward the door. This was not a man calmly negotiating his way out of debt. This was a man completely unraveling, right there in front of the very people trying to help him fix his life. And just when you think it can't get any darker, reports surfaced about an alleged scheme tied to his OC Roadhouse project down in Florida. One that reportedly tricked Central American investors out of $12 to $15 million. According to Miami Herald reporting, over a dozen separate businessmen each believed they held an exclusive stake in that same project, which is exactly the kind of pattern you see when the same lie gets sold to multiple people at once. Paul Senior was never formally charged for any of it, but by March of 2020, he had packed his bags and fled New York entirely, starting over in Clearwater, Florida, leaving behind a trail of furious creditors and unanswered questions. Now here is where the story circles back to his son, because Paul Jr.'s collapse was just as brutal, and it had been building for years before it finally exploded. Paul Jr. was fired on live television back in 2008. Despite owning 20% of the very company that fired him. His father tried to force him out completely, using a contract clause to strip away his ownership. Jr. refused to roll over. He fought his own father in court, and in December of 2010, an appeals court sided with him completely, ruling that Paul Sr. could not force that sale. Jr. kept his 20%, but the family was already shattered beyond repair. Contracts had replaced conversations. Lawyers had replaced trust. So what did Jr. do? He rebuilt from scratch. In 2009, he launched Paul Jr. Designs, and against all odds, it actually worked. Microsoft came calling. So did Cadillac and Mercedes-Benz. For a while, it looked like he had truly escaped his father's shadow for good. Then, in March of 2018, the exact same month his own father filed for bankruptcy, Jr. filed his own. This wasn't reckless spending catching up with him. This was the entire high-end motorcycle market collapsing after the 2008 financial crisis, and it hit him at the worst possible moment, right after he had spent nearly a decade proving to the world he did not need his father's name to survive. Today, Jr. has clawed his way back to a $2 million net worth. He still builds bikes, judges competitions, and had even partnered with a company in Germany to release his own electric bike. Yes, Jr. has survived the worst for now at least, but ask yourself this. If the 2 biggest names this show ever produced both hit rock bottom in the very same month, what does that tell you about how fragile this so-called empire really was the whole time? But as brutal as both of their stories were, neither one paid the harshest price in this entire saga. That price landed on a Teutul who was never once on camera, someone most fans of this show have probably never even heard of. The brother who was never on TV. While his brothers were becoming household names, Daniel Teutul was running the family's original steel fabrication company, OC Ironworks, which Paul Sr. had handed over to him back in 2004. On the surface, that looked like a generous gift. Underneath, it was a trap waiting to spring shut. In 2007, a bankruptcy trustee named Tom Genova filed a complaint accusing Daniel and his family of ripping OC Ironworks apart from the inside. According to that complaint, the machinery, the workers, and every single paying customer were allegedly dragged out of the original company and dumped straight into a brand new one called Orange County Ironworks, LLC, without paying the old company a single fair dollar for any of it. Picture that for a second. The entire workforce and every loyal customer gone in what the trustee described as basically one motion, leaving nothing but an empty shell behind. And that gutted, hollowed-out company was the one left standing to file for bankruptcy, which meant that when creditors came knocking for what they were owed, there was nothing left inside to collect. The trustee did not soften his language either. He called it fraud, straight up. When the case finally settled in December of 2008, Daniel was only 32 years old, and he was ordered to pay $500,000. To put that number into perspective, the average American salary back in 2008 was only around $40,000 a year. So Daniel's fine was more than 10 years of a normal person's entire income due all at once. And here is the gut punch. That penalty landed the exact same month the entire American economy was collapsing during the financial crisis, meaning Daniel had to somehow scrape together that kind of money at the worst possible moment banks could have chosen to freeze up. Most people would have folded completely under that kind of pressure, but Daniel did not. He never filed for bankruptcy, and he never vanished from the business either. Instead, he went straight back to work, clawing OC Ironworks back from the brink year after year, and he eventually launched a second company called Gabriel Steel. By 2024, his workforce had grown from 35 employees all the way to 69. While his brothers were chasing fame, Daniel quietly turned a fraud scandal into one of the strongest steel operations in the entire state of New York. And here is the detail that makes this whole story sting even harder. Daniel personally designed and fabricated the steel for the massive Orange County Choppers headquarters, the exact building that made his brothers instantly recognizable to millions of viewers every single week. He managed the entire construction himself. That building, the most photographed structure in this franchise's entire history, exists because of the one brother the show never once put in front of a camera. His face was never on a poster. His name was never stitched onto a single shirt. But the walls his famous brothers stood inside of, smiling for the cameras, those walls were built by the one Teutul who paid the harshest price of anyone in this entire family and walked away with none of the credit. So what does that really tell us? It was never about who worked hardest, and it was never about who had the most talent. It came down to one thing only: how close you stood to the spotlight. Daniel stayed far enough from the cameras that when the whole empire came crashing down around him, he still had something solid left standing. His brothers had fame, and fame dragged debt and lawsuits and public humiliation right behind it. Daniel had skills, and a company that never once depended on ratings to survive. That exact same rule, the closer you stood to the fame, the harder you fell, held true for nearly everyone else who ever set foot inside those walls. Some of them read the warning signs early enough to walk away while they still could. Others stayed until there was nothing left to save. The ones who got out in time. Picture this scene for a moment. Vinny DiMartino walks straight out the door of Orange County Choppers in August of 2007, after 5 years spent building some of the most iconic bikes this show ever produced. Paul Senior stares dead into the camera and says everyone's replaceable. No handshake, no thank you. Just a cold, brutal dismissal, aired for the whole country to watch. Now here is the twist absolutely nobody saw coming back then. Every single person who walked away early ended up standing on far more solid ground than the family members who stayed until the bitter end. Just take Rick Petco, for instance. For 13 straight years, he drove 90 minutes each way just to reach work, 5 days a week, stuck in traffic between Pennsylvania and New York, all to build bikes for a television audience. And every time he showed up on screen, Rick pocketed an extra $13,000 on top of his regular salary. By 2016, his net worth had climbed to $1,750,000. But money was never the whole story for Rick. He got married in 2012, and that changed everything about how he saw his life. He watched his days getting swallowed whole by that brutal commute and by the non-stop war between Paul Senior and Paul Jr. So in 2016, Rick did something most people only talk about doing at the dinner table. He walked away from the television money completely and moved back home for good. His new job at a local Harley-Davidson dealership sat minutes from his house instead of 90. That was great while it lasted, Rick later said, but it was never the core of who I really was. Today he runs his own company from his farmhouse, crafting custom knives and wedding bands, traveling to motorcycle shows with his wife and kids on his own schedule, not because some production crew demands it. Vinny's path after leaving was far rougher. He opened a shop called V-Force Customs with a young builder named Cody Connolly, and for a while, business was booming. Then the 2008 financial crisis hit, and it wiped out the entire custom motorcycle market almost overnight. By late 2013, the buyers had completely vanished, and it did not matter how good Vinny's work was, because there was nobody left willing to pay for it. As the shop crumbled, Vinny was reportedly forced to sell off his own equipment piece by piece, the very same tools he had once used to build bikes that aired in front of millions of viewers, all liquidated one item at a time just to scrape together the final bills. Eventually, he opened a new shop fixing everyday cars and light trucks for locals instead. And today, his estimated net worth sits around $1 million. Cody Connolly's story cuts the deepest of all, because he was barely more than a kid when this all began. Cody joined Orange County Choppers at just 14 years old, and viewers genuinely watched him grow up right in front of their eyes on national television. Paul Senior even paid for him to attend a motorcycle training institute. Cody left the show in October of 2007 at only 20 years old, but he did not walk away quietly. He filed a lawsuit, claiming his own face had been slapped onto merchandise without ever paying him a single dollar for it. But the most brutal part of his claim involved a moment the show had staged as pure, heartwarming television. On camera, Paul Senior had handed Cody the keys to a custom chopper and told him straight to his face that it was his. According to Cody's own lawsuit, that bike never actually reached his hands. The keys, according to him, were nothing but a performance for the cameras. He demanded $250,000, and the case quietly settled in 2011. After that, Cody vanished from the motorcycle world entirely. Today he runs a demolition company. He is also married with a daughter and barely posts online at all. The boy who once welded gas tanks on national television now digs through dirt, far away from any spotlight that could ever find him again. Now let's turn to what happened to the ones who stayed close to the fire, because not everyone had the luxury of walking away. Paul Teutul spent years playing peacekeeper between his father and his brother during their most explosive fights. But behind the scenes, Mikey was locked in a battle of his own with alcohol, one that eventually spiraled so far out of control that Paul Senior threw him out of the company entirely. Mikey checked himself into rehab and fought his way back to sobriety, but the financial damage had already been done. In 2004, he had bought a house from his own mother for $550,000. By 2009, he was forced to sell it for only $460,000, losing $90,000 in the process, and his net worth collapsed from $2 million down to just $1 million. Eventually, Mickey clawed his way back, returning to the company as assistant general manager, and even launched his own small business selling homemade pasta sauces, along with opening an art gallery. Jason Pohl's story tells a different kind of damage entirely, one that played out in full public view. He joined as a senior designer in 2004, and at first, his futuristic designs genuinely wowed people. Then the internet turned on him hard, tearing his sketches apart for looking nothing like real motorcycles. The breaking point came when Paul Senior looked straight at one of his builds and called it a cake decorator, right there on camera, in front of everyone. Jason later admitted that having the owner rip his work apart publicly like that completely crushed him. And here is the part that makes it even uglier. That humiliation was happening at the exact same time the show was deliberately manufacturing father-son conflict just to keep ratings up, meaning his personal pain was quite literally being sold as entertainment. By the 2011 build-off, his flamethrower tank bike got mocked online as looking straight out of a video game. After Paul Senior's bankruptcy exploded across headlines in 2018, Jason's screen time dropped fast, and he officially left the company by March of 2020. He eventually rebuilt himself down in Florida, becoming a brand ambassador for a design software company, and today his estimated net worth sits around $700,000. Then there were the two who somehow dodged almost all of this drama completely. Nick Hansford worked there from 2002 all the way to 2019. And Christian Welter from 2002 to 2016. Neither one chased fame. Neither one got dragged into a lawsuit or a family feud. They simply showed up every single day, built bikes, and went home to their families. When the whole empire finally came crashing down, their names never once appeared in a bankruptcy filing or a fraud allegation. They just quietly moved forward with their lives. Nick now lives in Virginia with his wife and kids, and Christian walked away without a single headline chasing his name. So what does all of this really prove? Staying employed there was never the real danger. Staying visible was. And that exact same rule, the one that decided who walked away clean and who got buried, is also the key to understanding why this entire empire collapsed in the first place. Where they all are now. If you want real proof of just how badly this empire collapsed, look no further than the building itself. The original Orange County Choppers headquarters cost around $13 million to build, and it was never just a shop. It was a showroom, a museum, a restaurant, and even an arcade, all designed to dazzle tourists and television cameras, not to actually run like a functioning business. And buildings like that come with a bill that never stops arriving. In 2011, the town of Newburgh settled a lawsuit claiming the company had failed to pay $18,000 owed under a tax break agreement. And that was not some one-time slip. It was part of a pattern that had been building for years. That same year, Orange County Choppers was forced to surrender that entire headquarters just to dodge foreclosure. By March of 2016, a company called Diamond Properties scooped up that same building for a mere $2,300,000, less than 18% of what it originally cost to build. That is not a business deal. That is a fire sale, plain and simple, and everyone watching should have seen the writing on the wall. And the legal wreckage did not stop there either. The 38-acre property tied to Paul Senior personally was not fully resolved until the middle of 2019, when a bankruptcy court finally had to approve the sale terms, which meant federal judges were still untangling this mess more than a full year after the headquarters itself had already changed hands in a completely separate deal. On top of that, back in 2015, a bankruptcy trustee representing a subsidiary called Hudson Valley Merchandising sued Paul Senior directly, accusing him of secretly transferring $1,400,000 out of that subsidiary after he had already filed for bankruptcy back in 2013. And just when it looked like the entire bankruptcy case was finally settling down, an entirely new creditor came storming in out of nowhere. A company called Leonite Capital filed a lawsuit claiming it held a secured note giving it a legal right to actual equity inside Orange County Choppers itself, worth at least $500,000. And it argued furiously that it had never even been properly notified the bankruptcy was happening in the first place. That single lawsuit alone proves the financial hole ran far deeper into the company's ownership than the public bankruptcy filing ever revealed to the world. So what actually killed this business in the end? It was never one bad decision or one unlucky year. Orange County Choppers expanded hard and fast, built entirely on television money that was never guaranteed to keep flowing. They bought up properties, hired staff, and stacked up debt, all while betting everything that those network checks would never stop coming. Once that money slowed down, they were left holding costs they could not walk away from without tearing the entire business apart brick by brick. By the time 2020 arrived and Paul Senior packed his bags for Florida, that move was never about growth. It was a pure escape. So where does everyone actually stand today? Paul Senior is 76 years old now, and he is still out there building bikes at his OC Museum and Roadhouse down in Clearwater, Florida. He still posts videos online, still grips a set of handlebars for the camera, almost like the old days never truly ended. Paul Jr. is still building bikes too, still judging competitions, and he has even written a book and launched his own podcast. But here is the part that really tells you everything you need to know about where this family truly ended up. Fewer reunions have happened than fans ever expected. Time did not heal a single one of these wounds. If anything, it only made the cracks impossible to ignore. What actually survived out of all of this was never a shared future between these men. It was separate lives, each one carefully rebuilt to avoid repeating the exact same collapse ever again. Paul Senior has even hinted at a brand new television project, reportedly already filmed, featuring Rick, Mikey, and a man named Jim. But there is one glaring name missing from that entire lineup, and that name is Paul Jr. And once you notice that gap, you start to notice something even darker underneath it. That exact pattern stretches back over a decade. Every single attempted reunion or comeback this brand has ever tried has quietly required cutting out whichever family member happened to be locked in an active legal war with Paul Sr. at that exact moment. In other words, the entire comeback strategy has basically become editing around whichever relationship happens to be broken at the time. And that right there is the whole tragedy laid bare in one brutal truth. The very show that made this family famous is the exact same show that made it impossible for them to ever stay a family. Certain key cast members may be missing from whatever comes next, including Paul Jr., and that absence alone tells you everything you will ever need to know about where these relationships truly ended up.